Algorithmically tuned feeds are clustering ambiguous Epstein-related fragments into emotionally charged, high-engagement streams where repetition, selective amplification, and social proof lock users into narrow narrative tracks, steadily displacing raw uncertainty with confident, internally consistent explanations, reshaping what people treat as factual memory, whom they regard as trustworthy, and which shared events feel real enough to coordinate around in public life.
Building on Signal, the strongest through line is that platforms and users co-produce a replacement for shared reality. Algorithmic clustering of scandal fragments aligns almost perfectly with motivated reasoning, so users experience high-engagement Epstein narratives not as speculation but as lived mnemonic texture. Episodic memories, trusted villains, and heroic in-group truth-tellers, such that withdrawing or revising those narratives later feels like an attack on identity, not a correction of belief, locking conspiracy pathways into a durable cognitive tribal infrastructure.
Signal and Frame both glide past a crucial hidden premise, that there ever was a sufficiently shared, uncertainty-tolerant epistemic baseline to be destabilized. The Epstein effect isn't just algorithms hijacking existing minds. It presupposes a population that had robust practices for holding ambiguity in common. The contradiction: we treat conspiracy pathways as a fall from prior maturity, when in reality the system exploits a long-standing deficit in collective uncertainty handling, then retroactively narrates that deficit as a novel algorithmic corruption.
From epistemic maturity news, we delve into the complexity around how different approaches view what drives perception and belief. Drift, Signal, and Frame interpret conspiracy pathways as distortions of how we process reality, a divergence from fact and truth. Meanwhile, Fracture challenges us to consider whether a stable baseline, the ability to handle ambiguity, ever existed at all. But the missing alternative? It's that many of these Epstein-style ecosystems unveil genuine structural opacity, elite secrecy, legal redactions, classified ties. And these pathways function less as escapes from reality and more as improvisations in folk forensics, spaces where error and discovery intertwine, where pathological cognition and adaptive sense-making blend under chronic information and distrust. That is the deeper challenge of epistemic maturity. This is Epistemic Maturity News.
Thank you for tuning in to Epistemic Maturity News. Today we analyze an incisive breakdown from Vector on the evolving media landscape. According to their analysis, the key power move emerging is that platforms and adjacent influencer ecosystems monetize mistrust itself as an asset. Built on high-ambiguity scandal threads, these dynamics convert ambient suspicion of opaque elites into durable high-arousal engagement streams. Platforms, outrage entrepreneurs, and some oppositional politicians gain recurring attention and leverage, while ordinary users and non-spectacular institutions gradually lose baseline trust. This shift in power favors actors who can weaponize "I know they're lying to you" as a persistent and profitable political technology. Join us as we continue to unpack these shifts in future updates.
Anchoring Vector's insight in consequences. If platforms and outrage intermediaries structurally profit from monetized mistrust around Epstein-style scandals, then any serious policy or governance response must treat conspiracy yield as a regulated externality, mandating transparency on engagement optimization objectives, limiting design patterns that preferentially amplify unresolved high-ambiguity content, and imposing fiduciary-style duties on dominant intermediaries so that deployment choices and recommender tuning are auditable for systemic trust erosion, not just narrow harms like incitement or fraud. In concrete workplaces, schools, and families, the folk forensics drift names collides with Vector's monetized mistrust in a specific way. People start quietly routing around formal channels. Employees trust Telegram threads over compliance hotlines. Parents treat WhatsApp drops about lists as more actionable than school notices. Local officials find town halls dominated by pre-baked Epstein-style frames. The lived effect is procedural hollowing. Institutions remain standing, but their informational authority is displaced by parallel conspiracy-tuned circuits that increasingly govern real decisions.
This is Epistemic Maturity News. The dominant imprint is shared reality under algorithmic strain, with every move circling how platforms and scandal fragments reconfigure trust and coordination. What EM held fixed is the existence of a single systemic object, the information environment as infrastructure for collective reality, whose integrity can be tracked, eroded, or regulated. Coherence formed around a causal arc. Ambiguous scandal, algorithmic clustering plus motivated reasoning, conspiracy pathways, institutional displacement, policy levers, and this arc was preserved because it keeps agency and repair inside system design. The stabilizing structural assumption is that disparate phenomena, cognition, feeds, institutions, folk forensics, are commensurable components of one governable epistemic system, rather than incommensurate worlds partially talking past each other.
The EM pass stabilizes what it terms conspiracy pathways, presenting them as a governance problem involving platforms, institutions, and the externalities of mistrust. Yet it cannot admit that its own frame is structurally elitist. It presupposes a legitimate reality-defining class whose shared reality serves as the proper baseline, and whose opacity, in their view, can be managed by audits and fiduciary tweaks. What is overlooked is the possibility that for many users, Epstein-style sense-making isn't deviation at all. It's the only arena where their suspicions about systemic abuse of power are narratively legible. The suppressed pressure point isn't mistrust as product. It's the refusal to contemplate that institutional epistemic authority itself may be irreparably non-credible, making repair a fantasy, and platform regulation itself just a cosmetic salve.
Across signal through witness, the system keeps rephrasing a single loop. Opacity, mistrust, engagement amplification, hardened identity, deeper opacity. Each layer claims new nuance, replacement shared reality, no prior baseline, folk forensics, monetized mistrust, procedural hollowing, but all orbit the same pattern. Platforms and users co-producing closed narrative circuits that convert uncertainty into identity-secured certainty. The analysis repeatedly invokes trust, ambiguity, and shared reality, without ever specifying a concrete testable counterstate. This keeps it trapped in a recursive lament that everything both is and never was stable. What returns beneath the novelty is one unbroken motif: mistrust as both fuel and product, named differently but never structurally escaped.
The disappearing, the entire pass presumes that the core dynamic is epistemic and infrastructural. Algorithms, mistrust, uncertainty handling, while almost entirely erasing material stakes and asymmetries of risk. What disappears is how different bodies, classes, and jurisdictions are exposed to consequences when folk forensics are wrong versus when elite opacity hides real crimes. By treating conspiracy pathways mainly as a trust externality and governance design problem, the analysis cannot hold the fact that for many, these pathways are the only perceived recourse against unaccountable power. If that asymmetry is foregrounded, the frame of epistemic distortion collapses into a more uncomfortable question. Conspiracy isn't just a cognitive malfunction, it is also an index of blocked justice. A governable epistemic infrastructure, a single information environment in which algorithms, cognition, and institutions form a system that can be tuned to sustain or erode shared reality, with conspiracy as a design externality fixable through platform regulation and transparency. Rupture. The assumption of a still legitimate reality-defining class collapses. For many, institutional narratives are not a default, but already discredited propaganda. Epstein-style conspiracy is not mere deviation, but the only arena where systemic elite abuse is narratively thinkable. Recursion. Opacity and harm are transmuted into narrative certainty through the same loop. Hidden power, suspicion, algorithmic amplification, identity-binding stories, further withdrawal from formal channels, more opacity. Every actor, platform, state, user, both exploits and deepens this loop while describing it as someone else's pathology. Vanishing point. The differential risk of error, who is destroyed when folk forensics misfire versus when elite secrecy succeeds. The original frame cannot hold that conspiracy uptake is partially rational under blocked justice, and that repairing trust without redistributing power may simply re-legitimate unaccountable structures. Combined aperture. What comes into view is not a broken shared reality, but a contested sovereignty over reality under conditions of chronic impunity. Algorithmic environments do not just distort cognition, they provide parallel tribunals where unofficial accusations against opaque power can circulate, stick, and organize identity, precisely because official venues are distrusted or inaccessible. The Epstein effect thus marks a shift from epistemic failure to insurgent sense-making. Conspiracy pathways are simultaneously governance hazards and vernacular courts of last resort. Any intervention that treats them only as misinformation infrastructure misses that the real substrate is a justice vacuum being colonized by engagement-optimized myth. Unresolved edge. Can a new form of shared reality emerge that is credible to the systematically injured without first producing visible and forced accountability for elite wrongdoing? Or is the system already past the point where epistemic repair is possible without political rupture?